I found out my homeowners association, HOA, was using my family's farmland as a parking lot without our permission. They didn't know I had control over the power line that supplies electricity to their whole neighborhood. What would you do if you discovered your irritating neighbors needed your land to keep their electricity on? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I never expected to have a fight with my neighbors, but that's what happened when I was awakened by strangers parking on my farm. The noise of cars and doors slamming woke me up at 7 a.m. on what was supposed to be a relaxing Saturday. My grandpa's farmhouse has been on this land for more than 70 years, way before the new houses were built around it. I got this 10-acre farm 3 years ago when my grandpa died. It's not just land. It's my family's past, my future, and my joy. I put on my robe and hurried outside, still wearing my pajamas. What I saw made me furious. There were at least 12 cars parked neatly across my east field, the field where I planned to plant corn the following week. A lady in a blue jacket and with styled hair was directing more cars onto my land, acting like she was in charge. She carried a clipboard and had that insincere smile some people have when they believe they're important. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I yelled, running across my yard. My old farm dog, Rusty, barked beside me. The lady turned, looking bothered by the interruption. "Good morning," she said with a smile that wasn't genuine. "I'm Sarah Thompson, president of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association. I don't care if you're the president of anything," I said, trying to stay calm. "This is private property, my property, and you're trespassing." Sarah tilted her head like I was a little kid who didn't understand something simple. "Oh, you must be mistaken. This area was set aside as extra parking for the community in our HOA rules," she said, looking at her clipboard. "Are you the Smith who lives in the old farmhouse? We've been trying to get in touch with you about joining our group." "Not mistaken at all. I've never signed any HOA agreement," I said, taking out my phone to show her my property papers. "This land has been in my family for a very long time. We're not part of your housing development." Sarah's fake smile faded. "Well, this has been used for community parking for years. The previous board must have had a deal with your grandpa." "My grandpa would never agree to this," I said strongly. "He taught me to respect every bit of this land." Other neighbors were gathering, watching us argue. Some looked embarrassed, others annoyed at the delay. One man in golfing clothes shouted, "Hurry up! We'll be late for the game!" Then I saw something that made me forget about the parking for a moment. A large truck was backing up toward my back field, right toward the tomato plants I'd spent weeks caring for. "Stop that truck right now!" I yelled, starting to run. "You're ruining my crops!" The driver, seeing me running and waving, stopped just inches from my carefully tended rows. He rolled down his window. "The lady at the entrance told me to park big vehicles back here." I turned around to find Sarah right behind me, her face red with anger. "Mr. Smith, you're causing a problem. We have a community golf tournament today, and this is the extra parking area." "Says who?" I demanded. "Show me one paper with my signature on it." "Our community rules clearly say I'm not part of your community," I interrupted, "and you have 1 hour to get these cars off my property before I call the police and have them all towed." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." I took out my phone. "Try me." She grabbed my wrist. "Listen to me carefully. Evergreen Meadows is where the mayor, 2 city council members, and Judge Reynolds live. Who do you think the police will believe? A group of well-known community leaders or one stubborn farmer?" I pulled my arm away. "Take your hands off me. This is an attack, on top of trespassing." A few neighbors had come close enough to hear our argument. An older gentleman stepped forward. "Sarah, maybe we should just move the cars. If this is really his property—" "It's HOA property now," Sarah snapped. "And you can all blame Mr. Smith here when you're late for tea time." Just then, a shiny black SUV arrived, and a serious-looking man in an expensive suit got out. He walked straight to Sarah, ignoring me completely. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Sarah smiled, suddenly looking relieved. "Perfect timing, Michael. Our friend here seems confused about the parking arrangement." Michael turned to me, offering his hand. "Michael Williams, HOA lawyer. And you are the legal owner of the property you're all trespassing on," I said, not shaking his hand. His smile stayed. "I understand your confusion. The agreement that allows for community parking on this part of the land was made years ago. I have copies back at my office." "An agreement I never signed," I insisted. "Show me the papers right now." "We can discuss this calmly," Michael said smoothly. "Perhaps over coffee. There's no need for threats." I looked around at my invaded farm, cars on my fields, people staring at me like I was the issue. Something inside me broke. "You have 1 hour," I repeated. "Then I'm calling the police, the local news, and every towing company I can find." I turned and walked back to my house, ignoring Sarah's threats behind me. Inside, my hands were shaking so much I could hardly dial my phone. "County Records Office," a friendly voice answered. "This is Alex Smith at the old Miller farm outside Evergreen Meadows. I need to check if there are any agreements attached to my property. It's urgent." "We close at noon today," the voice said. "Can you come right now?" I looked at my watch, 9:15 a.m. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I grabbed my keys, I looked out the window. Instead of moving cars, more were arriving. Sarah was directing a pickup truck to park right next to my tomato plants. I saw her look toward my house with a smirk. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was a battle. The county records office was quiet on Saturday morning, with only 2 people working. The older man at the desk looked up as I rushed in. "I'm Alex Smith. I called about property records for the Miller farm." He nodded, holding out his hand. "George Thompson. Been working here 30 years. I knew your grandpa." This surprised me. "You did?" "Old man Miller was quite a character," George said with a smile. "Smart, especially when it came to protecting what was his." George led me to a small room filled with filing cabinets and computers. "Your property has an interesting history. The people who built Evergreen Meadows tried to buy your grandpa's land for years. He always said no." "I'm proud that he did," I said. George agreed. "Drove them crazy. They even tried to have the land taken, claiming it was a public problem." My stomach tightened. That sounds familiar. George pulled several thick folders from a cabinet. "Let's see what we have. Property papers, tax records, building permits." He spread the documents on the table, putting on reading glasses. After 20 minutes of searching, George sat back. "Just as I thought. There's no agreement for parking or public access on your property. Not a single paper showing your grandpa ever agreed to let the HOA use his land." Relief washed over me. "So they're definitely trespassing?" "Without a doubt," George confirmed. "But there is something interesting here." He pulled out a yellowed paper. "Your grandpa gave the power company permission 30 years ago to run electrical lines through the north corner of your property." I leaned forward. "What does that mean exactly?" George showed me a faded map. "According to this, the main power box for Evergreen Meadows is on your land. Your grandpa made this deal when the development was first built. The power company pays you $500 each year for access." I stared at him. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" George's eyes twinkled. "The HOA community's electricity goes through your property. Legally, you control access to that power box." "Can they move it?" I asked. "Not easily," George replied. "It would cost a lot of money and need county approval, new permits, and probably a long service interruption, plus your permission to end the current agreement." My mind was racing. "What about those payments? I've never gotten any money from the power company." George typed something into his computer. Payments have been going to a trust account in your grandpa's name since he passed away. They've been adding up. You should contact Pinewood Electric about updating the payment information. I left the records office with copies of everything, my heart pounding with anger and excitement. On the drive home, I called Pinewood Electric's emergency line. "This is Alex Smith. I own the property where power station E245 is located. I need to talk to someone immediately about people accessing this equipment without permission." After being transferred twice, I finally reached the operations manager. "Mr. Smith, I'm Bob Johnson. What seems to be the problem?" "Someone from Evergreen Meadows HOA is claiming they have rights to my property," I explained. "I'm worried about people going near the power station without permission." "That's a serious safety issue," Bob said. "That station serves over 200 homes in that area. Only approved people should be anywhere near it." "Exactly my concern," I replied. "I'll be putting up security cameras today and would like to know who has permission to access it." "Only Pinewood Electric workers with proper ID," Bob assured me. "I can email you the maintenance schedule so you know when our people will be on site." Perfect. By the time I got to my driveway, I had a plan. Surprisingly, most of the cars were gone from my field. Only 3 remained, along with deep tire tracks and crushed plants. I looked at the damage to my tomato field, taking pictures with my phone. Several plants were completely destroyed, representing weeks of work and future income lost. Inside my house, I printed the papers from the county office and put them in a folder. Then I found the old property maps my grandpa had kept, showing exact borders and landmarks. Just as I finished, there was a knock at my door. Sarah was there with Michael Williams, the HOA lawyer. 2 other people stood behind them. A serious-looking middle-aged man and a young woman holding a clipboard. "Mr. Smith," Sarah began, her tone falsely pleasant, "we've brought the parking agreement for you to sign." "Just a formality, really." I stared at her for a long moment. "No cars on my property by the end of the day, and I want payment for the damage to my crops." Michael stepped forward. "That's not how this works. The HOA board has already voted to use this area for community use. We're simply asking for your cooperation." "And if I don't cooperate?" The serious-looking man spoke up. "I'm Robert Thompson, city councilman. This community provides a lot of tax money for our city. Surely we can come to an agreement that helps everyone." The young woman with the clipboard looked uneasy. "The study for adding more parking within Evergreen Meadows would take months. This is really the only option for community events." I smiled, which seemed to make them nervous. "I've just come from the county records office," I said, holding up my folder. "There is no agreement for parking on my property, never has been." Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "Old papers can be updated." "I've also found out something interesting about your community's power supply," I continued, showing them the agreement papers. "The power box serving your whole neighborhood? It's on my land." Their faces changed instantly. Sarah's smile disappeared. Michael straightened his tie. The councilman took a small step back. "I'm officially canceling access for any maintenance that isn't essential until we fix this situation," I announced. "I've already talked with Pinewood Electric about people near their equipment without permission." "You can't do that," Sarah sputtered. "People have medical equipment, refrigerators." "I'm not cutting your power," I clarified. "I'm just using my property rights, the same way you're trying to use yours over my farm." The councilman cleared his throat. "Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out." "I agree," I said calmly. "Here's my offer. All vehicles off my property by 5 p.m., full payment for crop damage, and a written agreement that my land is not HOA property." "Or what?" Sarah challenged, though her voice had lost its confidence. I held up the power agreement paper. "Or I use my right to refuse access for scheduled maintenance next week. It's going to be a hot summer. It would be a shame if the system couldn't handle the load because it couldn't be properly serviced. They left quickly, talking urgently as they walked to their cars. I watched from my window as they drove away, feeling both victorious and worried. This wasn't over. People like Sarah didn't give up easily. My phone rang. It was Bob from Pinewood Electric. "Mr. Smith, I've been told there might be a problem with access to Power Station E245. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "There's been a misunderstanding with the local HOA. They seem to think they have rights to my property." "That's concerning," Bob replied. "That power box is very important. Any access problems could affect power for hundreds of homes." "I understand," I said. "I don't want anyone to lose power. I just need the HOA to respect my property rights." "Tell you what," Bob offered. "I can come out Monday morning to check the power box and discuss how to best handle access. Sometimes having someone official there helps clear things up." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a little more hopeful. But my relief didn't last. Through my window, I spotted Sarah's car returning, followed by 3 police cars with lights flashing. This fight was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. I stared at Sarah and her lawyer standing on my porch, with that parking agreement in hand. Their confident faces made me angry, but I kept my voice calm. "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly. "In fact, I'm giving you 24 hours to remove all vehicles from my property and fix any damage to my fields." Michael's expensive suit rustled as he leaned forward. "That's not how this works. The HOA board has already voted. And I've just discovered something interesting about your community's power supply," I interrupted, pulling out the agreement papers from the folder in my hands. "The power box serving your neighborhood? It's on my land." Their faces changed so quickly, it was almost comical. Sarah's smile vanished. Michael's confident posture collapsed. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered, grabbing the papers from my hands. "Check for yourself. My grandpa made this deal years ago. The power company pays me every year for access to that power box, the one that supplies electricity to every house in Evergreen Meadows." Michael adjusted his tie nervously. "This doesn't change anything about the parking situation." "Actually, it changes everything. I'm officially canceling access for non-essential maintenance until we fix this parking situation," I continued. "I've already left a message with the power company explaining the situation." "You can't do that," Sarah sputtered, her face turning red. "People have medical equipment, children, elderly residents." "I'm not cutting your power," I clarified, taking back my documents. "I'm just using my property rights, the same way you're trying to use yours over my farm. Interesting how that works, isn't it?" Sarah's phone was in her hand before they even reached their car. I could hear her yelling at someone as they drove away. Within 30 minutes, my phone started ringing with calls from different HOA board members. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called the power company myself and spoke with their legal department, confirming my rights under the agreement. They agreed to tell me before any non-emergency work was done on the power box. By dinnertime, cars started disappearing from my field. I watched from my kitchen window as drivers hurried to move their vehicles, some looking worriedly at my house. By nightfall, my property was empty. The next morning, I woke up early to check the damage. Tire tracks had ruined parts of my east field, crushing young plants and compacting soil I'd spent months preparing. I took detailed pictures and videos, documenting everything. As I finished, I spotted Lisa, my friendly neighbor from Evergreen Meadows, walking along the fence line with her dog. "Morning," she called out. "Emergency HOA meeting last night. Never seen Sarah so angry." I walked over to chat. "What happened?" "She tried to convince everyone you were threatening to cut off our power, but old Mr. Henderson, he used to be a lawyer, pointed out that if the power box really is on your land and we've been using your property as a parking lot without permission, we could be in serious legal trouble." Lisa lowered her voice. "Half the board wanted to back down immediately, and the other half Sarah convinced them you're bluffing. She said no one would risk the bad publicity of appearing to threaten a community's power supply. Lisa looked uncomfortable. Just be careful, okay? She mentioned something about other ways to handle problem neighbors. I thanked Lisa for the warning and spent the rest of the morning calling fencing companies to fix the sections that had been damaged by cars. The earliest appointment I could get was 2 weeks away. That afternoon, while looking at repair estimates, I heard the mail truck. Walking out to my mailbox, I found a certified letter with the Evergreen Meadows HOA logo. Inside was a formal notice saying I was being fined $5,000 for unauthorized landscape changes and farming activities against community appearance standards. The letter also stated that I had 72 hours to remove all farming equipment visible from community roadways and cease all commercial agricultural activities or face additional fines of $500 per day. At the bottom was Sarah's signature, with a handwritten note. Perhaps now you'll reconsider our generous parking agreement. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking with anger. Then I noticed something strange. The letter had listed my property address as being part of the Evergreen Meadows. I called George at the county records office. They can't fine you if you're not a member, he confirmed after hearing my story. But be careful. I've seen HOAs like this before. They'll try to wear you down. What should I do? Document everything, get security cameras, and maybe talk to Brian Miller. He's a lawyer who specializes in fighting overreaching HOAs. Handled a similar case last year in Pine Creek. I thanked him and immediately ordered security cameras online. While checking out, I noticed an email notification. The power company had just deposited this year's easement payment into my account. An idea began forming in my mind. I looked up Brian Miller's number and left a message explaining my situation. Then, I walked out to look at the transformer on my property. The small green box I'd barely noticed before that suddenly seemed so important. As I approached it, I spotted fresh footprints in the mud surrounding it. Someone had been here recently. The access panel looked slightly ajar. "That's him!" she shouted, pointing at me standing near the transformer. "He was just tampering with it." I stood frozen beside my transformer, watching Sarah point her finger at me while yelling to the power company worker. My heart pounded in my chest. She was trying to frame me. "I just got here," I said calmly to the worker. "The panel was already open. Look at the security cameras on my barn if you don't believe me." The worker, his name tag read Dave, looked confused. "Ma'am, we don't have any reports of tampering." "Check it," Sarah demanded. "He threatened to cut our power yesterday." Dave approached the transformer cautiously and examined the panel. "This has definitely been tampered with. The access lock is broken." He turned to me with suspicion. "Sir, did you do this?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "I just noticed it myself and was about to call it in. My security cameras will show I've been in my house all morning until 5 minutes ago." "Convenient that you mention cameras," Sarah sneered. "Where are they? I don't see any." "They're being installed tomorrow," I admitted. But I had nothing to do with this. In fact, I paused, a realization hitting me. "Dave, when was the last time an official power company employee checked this transformer?" "According to our records, not for at least 3 months," Dave said, checking his tablet. I turned to Sarah. "How did you know the panel was open? You drove straight here and pointed it out." Her face flushed. I noticed it earlier when you were trespassing on my property," I finished for her. "Or when someone you sent was breaking the lock?" Dave looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm going to need to file a report about this." "Please do," I said. "And I'd like a copy, along with confirmation that no one from Evergreen Meadows has authorization to access this equipment." Sarah stormed back to her SUV without another word. Dave spent 30 minutes securing the transformer and taking photos. He gave me his card and promised to have his supervisor call me that night. Brian Miller returned my call. After hearing my story, he agreed to represent me. "Classic HOA overreach," he said. "They target properties they want to control, especially ones that don't fit their aesthetic vision. The good news is, you've got leverage with the transformer easement." A week passed without incident. I filed formal complaints about the trespassing and tampering, installed security cameras, and began working with Brian to draft a cease and desist letter to the HOA. Then, early Monday morning, my alarm system woke me at 4:30 a.m. The security app on my phone showed movement at my east fence. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief at what I was seeing. Someone was cutting through my newly repaired fence with bolt cutters. I called the sheriff immediately and rushed outside with my phone recording video. By the time I reached the fence, 3 sections had been cut open and a line of cars was already pulling into my field. "This is private property," I shouted, continuing to record. "You're trespassing." A woman in the first car rolled down her window. "We have permission from the HOA. Check your email if you don't believe me." One by one, each driver showed me the same email from Sarah, authorizing them to park in the community overflow lot on my property. The email claimed the dispute had been officially resolved. When Sheriff Reynolds arrived 20 minutes later, 12 cars were already parked on my land. He looked uncomfortable as I showed him the cut fence and my videos. "I'm sorry, but there's not much I can do right now," he explained after speaking with several drivers. "The HOA has submitted documents to the county showing this area is designated community parking." "What documents? Those are forgeries," I protested, showing him my property deed on my phone. "Look," he sighed, "this is becoming a civil matter. You've got conflicting claims and paperwork. Take it up in court. I can't just tow all these people's cars based on your word against the HOAs." After he left, I called Brian, who promised to file for an emergency injunction that day. But the courts moved slowly, and meanwhile, more cars kept coming. Fuming, I walked to Lisa's house. She had always been straight with me. She invited me in for coffee, her face showing concern. "I need to show you something," she said once we were seated at her kitchen table. She pulled out her tablet. "I'm on the HOA email list. What they're doing isn't right." She opened her email and showed me a series of messages between Sarah, Michael, and other board members. They discussed strategies for annexing the farm and forcing compliance through escalating pressure. "Keep scrolling," Lisa said grimly. The next email contained something that made my stomach drop. A scanned document with what appeared to be my grandfather's signature on an HOA agreement from 15 years ago. "That's fake," I whispered. "My grandfather would never have signed this." "I know," Lisa replied. "Look at the date, April 2009. Your grandfather was still the owner." "Yes, until he passed away 3 years ago. But that's not his signature. I've seen enough of his documents to know." Lisa nodded. "I thought so. Sarah's husband works at a printing company. He has access to equipment that could easily produce this." She scrolled to another email, this one from yesterday. "It gets worse. They're holding an emergency board meeting tonight. Special guest, Sarah's cousin who works for the power company. They're discussing options to permanently resolve the transformer issue." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "They're planning to reroute the electricity to bypass your property entirely," her cousin says. "It is expensive but doable. Once they do, you will not have much power." I sat back, stunned by how far they were willing to go. "Why are you showing me this? Won't you get in trouble?" Lisa sighed. "I bought my house here because it backed up to your farm. I loved seeing the open fields, the crops. Not another cookie-cutter house. They've been trying to force out anything that doesn't fit their perfect community vision for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. Judge Henderson granted our emergency hearing. Tomorrow 9 a.m., bring all documentation. I showed Lisa the message. Will you testify about these emails, if needed? She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, this has gone too far. As I walked home, I noticed a power company truck parked near my property line. Sarah's cousin was already getting to work. I had less than 24 hours to stop them. Back at my house, I gathered every document I had. Property deeds, easement agreements, photos of the damage, security videos, everything. Then, I made one more call to the local news station. I have a story about HOA corruption, forged documents, and property rights, I told the reporter. And it all comes to a head at a public meeting tonight. My heart pounded as I stood outside the packed community center. Through the window, I could see Sarah waving her hands excitedly, pointing at huge photos of my farm, now marked with parking spaces and walkways. People nodded along, completely fooled by her lies. I clutched my folder of evidence, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. The room went quiet as I walked in. Sarah froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open like a fish. Well, look who decided to join us, she said, regaining her composure. We were just discussing the community improvements planned for that. I saw you call it a farm. Several people laughed. I felt my face burn, but kept walking straight to the front of the room. Actually, I'm glad you're all here, I said loudly. There's something you all deserve to know about what your HOA leadership has been doing with your money and your trust. Sarah rushed toward me. He's trespassing. Someone call security. An older man in the front row stood up. Let him speak, Sarah. I want to hear what he has to say. Others nodded in agreement. I could see Sarah's perfect smile cracking at the edges. Fine. You have 2 minutes, she snapped. I connected my laptop to their projector while saying, I think you'll want to give me more than 2 minutes once you see this. The first slide appeared. A copy of my property deed and survey map, showing clear boundaries. Whispers spread through the crowd. As you can see, my farm has never been part of Evergreen Meadows. I've never signed any HOA agreement. I clicked to the next slide. The forged document with my grandfather's signature that Lisa had discovered. This is a forgery your board created. My grandfather passed 3 years ago, but this paper says it's from just 6 months ago. The room erupted. Sarah lunged for my laptop, but I moved it away just in time. He's making this up, she shouted, her face turning bright red. This troublemaker has been breaking our rules since he moved in. I calmly clicked to the next slide. The emails between Sarah and Michael, discussing how to force compliance through escalating pressure and make his life miserable until he gives in. These are your HOA emails, discussing the plan to harass me off my property, I explained. And this one shows Sarah authorizing $30,000 of your dues for legal consultations about taking my land. An angry buzz filled the room. People were standing now, pointing at Sarah and the board members seated at the front table. Where did you get those? Michael demanded, his lawyer face suddenly looking worried. That's not important, I replied. What's important is that your leadership has been lying to you. A woman stood up near the back. My husband and I paid a $500 fine last month for having a vegetable garden that was too visible from the street. Meanwhile, you're spending our money on this? Others joined in with similar stories. The room grew louder with each passing second. Sarah grabbed the microphone. Everyone calm down. This is a complicated legal matter that you don't understand. We're acting in the community's best interest. I clicked to my final slide. The county records showing the electrical easement. One last thing you should know, I said, raising my voice above the noise. The main transformer that powers your entire community. sits on my property. Your homes get electricity because my grandfather allowed the power company to place equipment on our land." The room went completely silent. "Is that true?" someone finally asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "I've confirmed it with the county records office and the power company. I have no desire to interfere with your electricity. I just want to be left alone to run my farm in peace." Thomas, a gray-haired man I recognized as living on the edge of the development, stood up. "I've had enough of this. Sarah, is any of this true? Have you been lying to us?" Sarah's face twisted with rage. "This meeting is over. Everyone needs to leave immediately." "Not until we get answers," shouted Lisa from the back of the room. Michael leaned over and whispered something in Sarah's ear. She pushed him away. "I don't care about legal consequences," she shrieked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've worked too hard to let some dirt farmer ruin everything." The crowd gasped. Sarah realized her mistake too late. "What I meant was," she started, but people were already shouting questions. "Have you been targeting other homeowners too? What else have you been spending our money on? Did you really forge documents?" Sarah grabbed her purse and headed for the side door. "This meeting is adjourned. The board will issue a statement tomorrow." Thomas blocked her path. "No, Sarah. I think we need a vote. Right now. All in favor of suspending the current board, pending an investigation, raise your hands." Almost every hand in the room shot up. Sarah's face went from red to purple. "You can't do this! It's against the bylaws!" "Actually," I said quietly, "your bylaws allow for emergency removal of board members in cases of suspected financial impropriety. Section 8, Paragraph 4. Sarah stared at me with pure hatred. Then, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number and spoke into it while staring directly at me. "Do it now," she said clearly. "All of it." 3 seconds later, the lights went out. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the shocked faces. Sarah's laugh cut through the darkness. "See what happens when you challenge me? Your precious farm controls our electricity. Let's see how you like it when—" Her voice was cut off by the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Screams filled the dark room. My phone lit up. The power company calling. "Hello? Yes, I'm at the HOA meeting right now," I answered loudly. Everyone went quiet. I put it on speaker. "Mr. Smith, we caught someone messing with your transformer. A woman in a blazer. Our cameras got everything. Police are on their way." Sarah's face turned white as a ghost. "He's lying!" she shrieked, but residents were already surrounding her, phones recording. "You tried to cut the power yourself to blame me?" I asked, shocked at how far she'd gone. The doors burst open as police officers entered with flashlights. Michael tried sneaking out the back, but ran straight into Officer Reynolds. The local news vans pulled up outside. Lisa had called them earlier. Just in case. 2 weeks later, I watched Sarah and Michael on TV, being charged with forgery, trespassing, and attempted vandalism. My farm was now famous locally as the HOA Battlers' Victory Garden. The new HOA president, Thomas, met me at my fence line. "We voted to help rebuild your damaged crops. Maybe we could work together instead of against each other." I smiled, shaking his hand. "I'd like that. Sometimes good neighbors just need good fences and clear boundaries."